Witches have been a part of mythology for as long as we've known scary creatures, except throughout history, people have gone all the way to accuse others of being a witch and killing them for it. And this hysteria kept on growing until we finally came to our senses. So I discovered the top 10 scary witch trials throughout history. I'm your host Andrew, and let's get right into this. Number 10, the Great Scottish Witch Hunt. The Great Scottish Witch Hunt of 1597 was a dark and terrifying period in Scottish history. A nationwide series of witch trials took place from March to October in that year, during which at least 400 people were put on trial for witchcraft and other various forms of diabolicism. The exact number of those executed is unknown, but believed to be around 200, and this was only from the second of the 5 nationwide witch hunts in Scottish history. One of the most high-profile cases of the witch hunt was that of Margaret Aitken, also known as the Great Witch of Belweary. She was likely arrested in Fife in April 1597 and pleaded guilty under torture. She then offered to help the commission identify other witches in exchange for her own life. Aitken and the commission visited several parts of Scotland, and many people were arrested and put on trial and then executed based on her accusations alone. However, Aitken's credibility as an expert witness was later discredited when she declared innocent the same people she previously identified as witches. The English diplomat Robert Bowes reported that the King James VI was pestered and troubled by the large number of witches reported here, with some estimates being told to him that there was thousands. The accused came from all social classes, and the king himself was deeply involved in the trials as a result. Number 9, the Wurzburg Trials. The Wurzburg witch trials, which occurred between 1626 and 1631, were among the largest mass trials and executions of their kind in Europe during peacetime. 157 men, women, and children in the city of Wurzburg, Germany were burned alive at stake, with 219 executed in total in the city and 900 burnt altogether in the surrounding area. These individuals were accused of practicing sorcery and witchcraft, making a pact with the devil, and were part of the widespread witch hysteria that took place in South Germany during this time period. The persecutions were orchestrated by Julius Edgar von Mestelbrunn, Prince Bishop of Wurzburg, and his nephew Philip Adolf von Ehrenberg in the years following the Catholic reconquest of Germany in the 1620s. As a result, people from all walks of life were arrested and charged, regardless of age, profession, or sex, for a variety of reasons, which included murder, Satanism, or even humming a song with the devil. In his 8-year reign, von Mestelbrunn was responsible for burning 900 people, including his own nephew, 19 Catholic priests, and children aged 7 who were said to have intercourse with the devil. Frederick Spee, a Jesuit whose experience as a confessor of witches in the Great Persecution at Wurzburg led him to believe that all the confessions were based solely on torture, and not a single witch whom he had led to the stake was guilty at all. The trials were finally put to an end in 1631 when the city was taken by King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. Number 8, the Basque Witch Trials. The Basque Witch Trials of Logrono near Navarre in northern Spain were one of the most ambitious attempts at rooting out witchcraft ever undertaken by the Spanish Inquisition, and perhaps the biggest single event of its kind in history. It began in January 1609 against the background of similar persecutions conducted in the Labourd province of Basque country by Pierre Leconche. The accused were mainly women, but also included children and other men, including priests guilty of healing with nomenas, which were these amulets with names of saints. The first phase of the trials ended in 1610 with a ritual of public penance for condemned heretics against 31 of the accused, 11 or 12 of whom were burned to death, and 5 who already died under torture. The proceedings were then suspended until the inquisitors had a chance to gather further evidence on what they believed to be a widespread witch cult in the Basque region. The junior inquisitor of the 3-man tribunal, Alonso Solares Frias, traveled across the countryside during 1611 near the French border, where he claimed to know a cave and a water stream known as Hell Stream. Here he said was a supposed meeting place of the witches. He was armed with the Edict of Grace, promising pardon to all those who voluntarily reported themselves and denounced their accomplices, and denunciations flowed in. Frias finally returned to Logrono with confessions from 1,802 people, 1,300 of whom were children between the ages of 7 and 14, in turn implicating a further 5,000 or so named individuals. However, the vast majority of the witnesses retracted their statements before Salazar, attributing their confessions to torture, and only 6 of the 1,802 men maintained their confessions and claimed to have been attended Sabbats. Frias, the youngest judge, judge in the Inquisition panel of the three was himself skeptical about the whole thing, saying that he found no solid proof of witchcraft on his travels in spite of the manifold confessions, and he questioned the whole basis of the trials. Number 7, the Camonica Witch Trials. The Camonica Witch Trials were two large trials which took place in Camonica in Italy in 1505 to 1510 and 1518 to 1521. They were among the biggest Italian witch trials and caused the deaths of about 60 people in each trial, 110 in total. The region had not undergone full conversion to Christianity until the 5th century, and thus even by the 8th century, the area was still suspect of paganism. In 1499, it was accused of having participated in a black mass, and it was reported to be common with such depravity in the area. This led to the laws of 1498, where stern laws were issued against all devilish heresy. The first trial, which went from 1505 to 1510, started with 7 women and 1 man being burnt in Simo and Valcomica, and in 1510, witches were burned who were accused of having caused a drought by magic. 60 women and men confessed having injured people and animals and land with their spells. They caused fires. The second trial, which went from 1518 to 1521, occurred after the Peace of Noyon with France, and here in July 1518, more than 60 women and men were burned at the stake. The trials had a lasting impact on the region, with Christianity still weak in the area, even decades after the trials. The church had to instigate another visit to make the inhabitants more Catholic. Old pagan cults and habits were still alive there, but this time, however, the visit of the church did not lead to executions. Number 6, the trial of the Bideford Three. The story of the execution of Temperance Lloyd, Mary Trembles, and Susanna Edwards in the late 17th century in England serves as a tragic reminder of the country's superstitious past and the dangers of mass hysteria. By the late 17th century, the witch hunting craze had died down in England, and most of the witch trials after the Restoration in 1660 ended in acquittal. However, the trial of the Bideford witches were exceptional in that it ended with their execution. It was also remarkable in that the condemned women came from relatively sophisticated provincial towns, whereas most witch hunts occurred in isolated rural villages. The story of the trial is preserved in the Book of Bideford, written in 1792 by a local historian named John Watkins. Watkins believed that the women were the victims of hatred and ignorance, writing, quote, "There was always some poor devil, either on account of an unlucky visage, sour temper, or wretched poverty, set up as the object of terror and universal hatred. The women were accused of using witchcraft to cause the illnesses of a local woman, Grace Thomas, and the list of accusations grew as others came forward. The trial that took place on the 19th of August was not conducted by the usual means, as witchcraft was considered a crime apart, and suspicion alone was adequate grounds for accusation. Being absent from the scene of the crime was not a sufficient alibi, and it was permitted for children to act as witnesses. The city was seized with curiosity about the witches, and the streets rang with tales of their supernatural powers. Public hysteria was at fever pitch, and Roger North, brother of Lord North, one of the judges due to preside over the trial, feared that the country's people would have committed some disorder if they were acquitted. As a result, the 3 women were found guilty and hanged in August 1682. In the hump of our list, we have the Salem Witch Trials. In January of 1692, the daughter and niece of Reverend Samuel Paris of Salem Village became ill. The girls were experiencing strange symptoms such as uncontrollable fits and hallucinations, and the local physician, William Griggs, was called in to diagnose their condition. To the shock and horror of the community, Griggs declared the girls were suffering from bewitchment. This diagnosis set into motion the events that would ultimately lead to the hanging deaths of 19 men and women, with 1 man being pressed to death and several others dying in prison. Soon, prisons were filled with more than 150 men and women from towns surrounding Salem. Their names have been cried out by tormented young girls as the cause of their pain. All of them would await trial for a crime punishable by death in the 17th century New England, the practice of witchcraft. In June of 1692, the Special Court of Oyer to hear and Terminer to decide sat in Salem to hear the cases of witchcraft. The first to be tried was Bridget Bishop of Salem, who was found guilty and was hanged on June 10th. This was followed by 13 other women and 5 other men who were also executed in the next 3 days. Eventually, the court was disbanded by Governor William Phips, and the court did not allow for any sort of spectral evidence no longer. Realizing their issues, they pardoned all those awaiting execution for witchcraft, and this marked the end of the infamous trials. Number 4, the Northern Moravia Witch Trials. Northern Moravia, a historical place in Czech Republic, was not a good place for perceived witches in the latter half of the 17th century. During the time, hundreds of women were burned at the stake as witches, and a single witch trial could lead up to 100 executions. One particular tragedy started during a mass when an altar boy saw that an old lady had pocketed her communion bread instead of eating it. When a priest confronted the woman about this, she explained that she was going to give the bread to her cow to increase its milk production. The priest took this as a sign of witchcraft and alerted a judge who specialized in such cases. Unfortunately, the justice system of the time actually derived revenue from trials. As the judges and courts sentenced more and more people for public burnings, they sustained their income by finding more and more witches to prosecute and execute. Their methods for finding new victims involved gathering accusations of witchcraft from concerned citizens, and of course, the tried and tested method of prisoner torture. This led to the cycle of fear where the community was constantly on the lookout for witches, accusing anyone who they found suspicious. The witch hunt in northern Moravia reached a boiling point when the body count grew so high that the area's ruling class started to get concerned. Surely, it was just a matter of time before they or someone they cared about would fall victim to the witch hunt. With all their power, they started putting political pressure on the government to stop the trials. And this ultimately happened, and the people of northern Moravia were left to wonder how on earth they condoned a brutal mass murder for so long. Number 3, the Doruchow Trials. The Doruchow Witch Trials is a fascinating and historical event that has been shrouded in mystery and controversy for centuries. The trial, which allegedly took place in the 18th century in the village of Doruchow in Poland, is said to have been the last mass trial of witchcraft in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. According to older historians, in 1775, the inhabitants of Doruchow asked for the authorities in the nearby city of Grabau to halt the investigation of sorcery, which had been initiated in the village. The trial was conducted by the court of Grabau, which judged 14 people guilty of witchcraft and sentenced them to death. This trial allegedly led to the Polish government to ban torture and witch trials in 1776. However, modern Polish historians have cast doubt on the veracity of this account. Janusz Tasbier, for instance, has pointed out that the most detailed account of this event was given by early 19th century writer Konstantin Majanowski, who had been found by later historians to have authored several historical hoaxes. Tasbier notes that the existing primary sources can prove that only 6, not 14 women were sentenced to death, and it is not clear whether they are actually executed. Further, the documents examined by Tasbier indicate that the trials took place not in 1775, but later in 1783 or even shortly before that. Number 2, the Trier Witch Trials. The Witch Trials of Trier is a dark chapter in history where thousands of people were accused, tortured, and executed for witchcraft in present-day Germany in the late 16th century. The trial, which took place in 1581 and 1593 in the independent Catholic Diocese of Trier, is considered to be one of the largest and most brutal witch trials in history. Trials were initiated by Johann von Schauenberg, the Archbishop of Trier, who was deeply influenced by the Jesuits. He sought to demonstrate his convictions by purging the society of 3 groups he deemed as nonconformists: Protestants, Jews, and witches. He ordered the persecution of these groups, and the trials soon escalated, leading to the death of about 368 people in Trier alone, and possibly thousands more throughout the entire diocese. The exact number of executions have never been established, with estimates ranging from a few hundred to over 1,000. The trials were characterized by the use of torture, with many innocent people accused and put to death. The accused were often put through brutal interrogations, including the use of thumb screws, waterboarding, and other forms of brutal punishment. The trials were also marked by the greed and corruption, as notaries, copyists, and innkeepers grew rich from the trials, while the executioner rode a blooded horse and dressed in gold and silver. The trials had a devastating impact on the region, leaving many villages with only one female inhabitant and causing widespread devastation and suffering. Many of the victims were innocent people, including men, women, and children of the nobility, and people with positions in the government and administration. The persecutions lasted for several years, with many people doubting that all of those who were accused were actually guilty. And obviously, as we know today, probably none of them were guilty. Number 1, the Islandmagee Witches. In September 1710, an older widow of local priests was staying in No Head House in the rural region of Islandmagee, Ireland. Her stay was plagued by mysterious events, such as invisible hands hurling stones at windows. Around this time, household objects disappeared and reappeared, and bedclothes were rearranged in the shape of a corpse. The widow even saw a frightening demonic creature, warning her that she would die soon. The apparition was not joking. On February 21st, 1711, the widow died after experiencing a series of stabbing pains in her back. The locals immediately suspected that witches had something to do with the widow's terrible fate. After a young girl called Mary Dunbar found a strange apron containing the bonnet of the dead widow, supernatural events started to happen around her too. She appeared to be possessed, vomiting small household objects like pins and buttons, and even levitating above her bed. After a month of torment, Mary managed to name 8 women from the area as witches responsible for the events. This was based on the way their spirit images had been visiting her. The local clergy, along with Edward Clements, the mayor of the nearby Carrickfergus, who was the ancestor of Samuel Clements, also known as Mark Twain, started investigating the case. The 8 women were taken to court despite their pleas of innocence. There were very little actual proof against them apart from Mary's accusations and eyewitness reports of her convulsions. Even so, the witches were sentenced to a year's imprisonment in a filthy prison, all because the judge probably wasn't happy about killing witches, and especially ones who could potentially visit him in his sleep. These are the top 10 scary witch trials throughout history. What do you guys think about this list? Leave a comment down below with your thoughts. I'm your host Andrew, and I hope you guys have a scary day.